Okay, let's dive into a fascinating new study recently published in the journal Evolution and Human Behavior. Honestly, this one flips almost everything we thought we knew about romantic jealousy completely on its head. In this explainer, we're going to look at the exact mechanisms that trigger our deepest insecurities. And we're doing it not by looking at messy real-world fights, but through the lens of a highly controlled economic experiment. It turns out how your partner handles a few dollars might just be the absolute ultimate test of your relationship security.
But before we get into the actual lab data, I want you to put yourself in the shoes of the participants for a second. What really sets off your own internal warning system? Is it a lingering glance? A late-night text message? Or maybe your partner's spending an unusual amount of time or money on a new friend? Keep that personal trigger in mind as we go, because what science says should bother you might actually be wildly different from what we're about to explore. Section 1. The evolutionary myth and what we thought we knew about jealousy.
To really grasp why this recent experiment by researchers at the University of Santiago de Chile is such a game changer, we first have to look at the traditional rules of evolutionary psychology. For decades, scientists have operated under this very specific set of assumptions about human mating. It perfectly illustrates the ancient jealousy divide. The classic theory basically says that early human men and women faced fundamentally different historical challenges, right? Men were supposedly hyper-reactive to sexual threats because of the terrifying risk of unknowingly raising another man's child. Women, on the flip side, were supposedly wired to fear emotional infidelity, basically the fear that their partner might divert time, protection, and crucial resources to another family.
Now, that sounds perfectly logical on paper, doesn't it? But here is the major catch. The whole problem with these accepted evolutionary theories is that they were mostly based on imaginary scenarios. Researchers would literally just hand out simple surveys asking people to imagine a hypothetical cheating situation and rate how they felt. But let's be real, imagining a betrayal and actually experiencing the visceral sting of one are two entirely different beasts. The researchers knew they absolutely had to move beyond the imaginary.
Moving on to Section 2. Testing the status quo by putting real money on the line. Lead researcher Ana Maria Fernandez and her team decided it was high time to test these status quo theories in a much more realistic setting. They wanted to observe actual behavior, not just survey responses. So they tapped into the fascinating world of experimental economics to see if financial decisions could mimic ancient survival threats. Specifically, they focused on modeling a concept known as mate poaching. That's basically a fancy term for situations where someone intentionally tries to attract a person who is already in a committed relationship. You know, the classic threat of a rival swooping in. Let's look at their methodology because it is a brilliant proxy that completely replaces imaginary cheating with a real-time behavioral game. They brought 79 heterosexual couples, so 158 individual participants, into the lab and separated them using physical partitions. Then they had them play a computer-based financial exercise called a dictator game, but with a massive twist. Participants fully believed they were interacting online with their real-world partner and an opposite-sex stranger who was acting as a romantic rival. After every single round of money distribution, they had to rate their jealousy on a scale from 1 to 5. So the researchers set up two main scenarios to test that old evolutionary divide we talked about. In the investment scenario, you literally have to sit there and watch your partner actively give 75% of their available money to the rival, leaving only 25% for you. Ouch, right? This was designed specifically to trigger female jealousy by mimicking a partner diverting resources. Then, in the receiving scenario, you watch your partner passively accept a large sum of money from the rival. This was designed to trigger male jealousy by mimicking a rival attempting to buy their partner away. Which brings us to Section 3, the surprising plot twist, or when expectations meet reality. Now, what is totally wild about the data is how it completely subverts all those expected gender differences. If the old evolutionary textbooks were 100% right, we would see a massive split in how men and women reacted here. But contrary to all those classic expectations, the investment scenario caused the highest levels of jealousy for absolutely everyone. Regardless of gender, both men and women felt incredibly threatened when they watched their partner actively give money away to a rival. The whole evolutionary divide basically vanished the second real investment was on the line.
And what about the receiving scenario? Well, the researchers fully expected men to just freak out over their partner receiving money from a rival, viewing it as this massive red flag of sexual interest from an outsider. But nope. The data showed that both men and women displayed similar and honestly relatively low levels of jealousy here. The anticipated panic just did not materialize at all.
Section 4. Why giving hurts more? Intention versus passive benefit.
So why on earth is actively giving money universally recognized as a massive red flag, while receiving money barely even registers on the jealousy scale? It all boils down to the underlying psychology of the action itself. As lead researcher Ana Maria Fernandez points out so brilliantly, actively giving money requires thought, intention, and sacrifice. It's definitely not an accident. When you see your partner giving away resources to a rival, both men and women instantly interpret that as a deliberate, flashing warning sign of a partner actively slipping away.
Let's break down exactly why this matters. See, passively receiving money doesn't actually send a strong signal of betrayal. Let's be honest, a partner might just be accepting a free benefit. It doesn't automatically mean they are sexually interested in the rival. And to make absolutely sure this wasn't just people getting frustrated over unequal money, researchers ran control scenarios with random strangers. That proved the jealousy only flared up when there was a direct, clear threat to the participants' own relationship bond. Although there was one super interesting, subtle gender difference. Women reported feeling jealous when watching literally any committed man give money to a single woman, even a total stranger. This kind of suggests women might be more generally vigilant about how men distribute resources overall, treating it like a broad social warning sign.
Section 5, the personality factor and why some reacted way stronger than others.
Beyond those universal triggers of watching resources leave the relationship, researchers wanted to know, why did some people hit a literal level 5 on the jealousy scale, while others were barely annoyed? Well, they discovered that underlying personality traits act like a massive amplifier for the jealousy alarm. They measured this through questionnaires, specifically looking at something called attachment anxiety. Basically, that's a deep-seated fear of abandonment and a constant need for reassurance. They also measured a very modern metric called digital jealousy. That's the specific anxiety people feel about their partner's online interactions. You know, who they're messaging, whose photos they're constantly liking. The study found that if you scored high in both attachment anxiety and digital jealousy, you experienced much, much more jealousy across all the different game scenarios.
This tells us something absolutely profound about human nature. While the trigger itself, the active investment of time or money in a rival, is a universal threat, the volume of the alarm is largely determined by your own internal wiring. Your natural disposition and your own insecurities dictate exactly how loud that alarm is going to ring in your head.
Finally, Section 6, the takeaway, bringing the lab to life. Before we wrap this explainer up, we definitely have to talk about the boundaries of this experiment, because no single study explains the entire human heart, right? The researchers readily acknowledge the limitations here. Clicking buttons in a lab setting for small amounts of money obviously can't fully capture the intense, visceral pain of a real-world betrayal. Plus, people might subconsciously adjust their survey answers to seem a bit more socially acceptable. Finally, the sample of 79 couples was mostly young, educated, and heterosexual, hovering around 30 years old. The researchers actually hope to track older, more diverse couples over time to see how jealousy morphs as relationships mature.
But even with those caveats, the core takeaway is a real game changer. The ultimate universal relationship threat isn't necessarily just a wandering eye. It's the intentional sacrifice of resources. Considering that active investment in a rival triggers the absolute loudest alarms for both men and women, I'm going to leave you with this final thought to ponder. If this lab game was played out in the messy, unstructured reality of your own life, how loud would your jealousy alarm ring? And more importantly, what exactly would it take to set it off? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking questions and keep learning.